Might as well be Greek. All right, we are back. It is COMP1004, fall 2016 semester at Georgian, and we are week 11, part 2 of our broadcast. We just finished talking about assignment 5 in a lot of detail, and I did that because it's the final assignment, right? So I want to talk about visual inheritance now, because some of the stuff we've been doing up to date is we always do a lot of copy paste, copy paste, copy paste. It's a pain in the ass, right? So is there an easier way? By the way, the answer is no. There's not a real easier way. If I show you visual inheritance, you're not going to like it. But I got to show it to you, right? So here it is, right? So in order for me to use visual inheritance, I'm going to create a new project. So I'm going to kind of close my little slot machine project down. As an example, by the way, for people who are using Unity and people who are not in the room today, who want to use do a game, I've got 2 zip files. One of them says slot machine 2D. If you see that zip file, that is for Unity. Please don't try and look at, use that for your Visual Studio. It will not work properly. All right, it's only for Unity. The one that says, I might as well show you. I'm feeling bad. So under the 5th assignment, there's 2 zip files, right? There's slot machine zip and slot machine 2D. Notice the slot machine zip is about 900K, and the other one's about 1.5 meg. The 1.5 meg one, this one that's 2D, is only for Unity. Please do not try and use this with Visual Studio. It will fail, right? And also, don't try and use the slot machine.zip file with Unity. That will fail as well for Unity, right? So I'm giving you options just because I want to make it fun, right? Please don't make my life hell by saying, I've used slot machine 2D and put it in Visual Studio and it doesn't work. Tom, fix me. Not going to happen, right? It's only going to be the other one. Hey, what about one more thing before I had a question that came up. What if you don't want to use my starter code at all, like completely? Like you want to do your own slot machine from the ground up? I don't know why, but if you don't want to do that, please see me. That's the answer. Don't just do it, because sometimes what happens is you go down a dark road, and you write yourself into a black hole. No one will ever see you again, and you won't finish your project, right? So please talk to me about it first before you do that, because we don't want to bite off more than we can chew here at the last 3 weeks of class, right? That would be very bad. We're sitting at week 11, we have week 12, we have 13, and then we have the exam, right? So really we only have a couple weeks left, and this is worth 20% of your final grade. We want to make it a fun assignment, not a death assignment, right? So please don't go crazy and make your own code unless you absolutely want to, and then talk to me about it first, okay? I will show you in your slot machine 2D. That one. You have to open up Unity, and from there you have to click open, and then point to that and press open. That's it. I will show you. It's not that difficult. Okay. So let us progress with the next piece, which is I have a new project I'm going to do today, which is lesson 11. Right. So we're going to continue today's stuff. It's not a lot we're going to do today because this can take up a little bit of time for us to do this properly. Last week we went overboard, and we spent, file management was a big piece. Data files took up a lot of piece. We actually went over. Again, it's required for your assignment number 4 to have data and database. So both saving files to the local folder plus your database. That's assignment 4. All right. By the way, for those people who haven't handed in assignment 1, 2, 3 for whatever reason, or 4, I have opened them all up. So you can get them. You can resubmit for part marks. Worst case scenario. So if you're late, something happened. If you didn't if we haven't communicated, right, and if you still want to submit stuff like that's how you haven't done, assignment 1, 2, 3, I will accept them, but it will just be part marks. So you probably won't get more than 50%, but you'll get, it's better than 0. Better than the kick in the butt, right?
What are marks?
Right, marks. What are they? Who cares about those? Let's go back. So Windows Forms application, you're right, thank you. So I want to do COMP 1004, F2016, and it's going to be lesson 11, right? That's what I'm going to do. Kicking this off, pressing OK, and now we have a little form. Now, because I want to put this up on GitHub, I'll do it right away. So I'm going to go to my Solution Explorer here, and then under Team Explorer, I'm going to go sync, and it's going to go right up on GitHub. So I'm going to go to GitHub, publish to GitHub, and then here I'm going to choose Georgian. And then it's going to go COMP1004, F2016, lesson 11, publish. So this thing will be up there. Yeah. Okay. So I have a form, and I did all this work. Let's say I have a next button. Maybe I have a back button, and I want that same next button, back button to be repeated over and over again instead of me, kind of creating a form. How do I do that? Right. Well, first of all, I create my base form. So let's say I want all my forms to have the same style, and I want to have all my forms to have some similar functionality. I want to create all that stuff up front. So first, in my form itself, what I might want to do, and this is just, I say might because you may want to do this or may not. In the form itself, I may want to choose a font that I'm going to be using for the entire form. For example, I want to choose, first of all, what we said before was very important. See how it says auto scale mode font? Turn that puppy off, right? Don't use auto scale font. Turn it down to none. Don't auto scale at all. Number one. Second, I want to go into this part and I want to choose, I don't know, like I did before, Lucida Sans, right? And spell property. Here's Lucida Sans. And I'm going to choose something like, I don't know, 16, right? Notice how it didn't change shape like it usually does because I don't have auto scale mode to font. So it's not going to scale here, right? So I've got my default font is 16 points right now, right? I also want to reshape the form. So it says, I'm going to call this the base form. You can call it whatever you like, but I'm going to use this form not to create my application, but as a base form that I'm going to inherit from, okay? So I'm going to right click here and I'm going to rename this form. I'm going to call it base form. You can call it whatever you like I said. I mean, it has to make sense for you. For example, if I'm making a form that goes forward and back, I may have something else that's called the forward and back form or something like that. Okay, this would be very bad what I just did. Very bad. Very, very bad. Let me go back to form 1 for a second. Form 1. Form1.cs. I didn't choose .cs. Be very careful. What I just did was totally mess it up. Okay, right click and we'll rename and we'll call this base form.cs. It's going to ask me to change everything. Yes, I do want to change anything. And of course, we totally messed up. Yep. What did I do? How did I mess it up? I messed it up because I took away the CS. And it didn't know how to rejig this whole thing. So I'm just going to kill this thing. Yeah, I love messing up. It's good learnings for everybody. Okay, let's try this again, right? So what I meant to do was right-click, add new Windows form, and we're going to call this base form from the get-go. Base form.cs. There we go. And this base form.cs, what I want to do is, again, I want to change the basic fonts. So again, the way to do that one more time is make sure that the your auto scale mode is not font, it is none. That's the one thing to do. As well as if you go scroll all the way down to where it says starting position, I want to change that for sure to center screen. So I like that. And I want to change my font, this font itself. I want to change it to Lucida Sans 16, let's say. And maybe I don't care about renaming it, but I want to put a couple of buttons on here now, right? So save this, oops, save the form. And I want to put a couple of buttons because this is what I want to do with this thing. I'm going to create an instance of this form over and over again. So the buttons that I'm going to create here are a back button and a next button. So let's make the buttons. So here's we'll call this the next button. You see this a lot, right? And we'll call this next. And we also want to kick off this, we'll copy paste. We'll make this button over here on this side. We'll call this back. Okay, and we'll kind of put it up here. We'll call this the back button. All regular stuff that you see. Notice that it took on the properties of Lucida Sans 16 and it didn't resize my form, let's say. So I've got this stuff going on, right? Back button, next button. Okay. Other things I need. I want to create a property so that I can, a previous form can go to this form and know what the previous form is, right? So now this is a little bit more tricky to do. So if I go to view code, in my code, I want to create a previous form, right? Now, here's the problem with this. right? Because this is my base form, and the colon here in C# means inherits from or extends. It replaces the keyword extends in Java or in other languages. So form is the base form, the superclass of all forms. And base form is our form, the one that we're using right now, which extends the superclass form. Okay? I wanted to explain that. Now, I messed it up. So in my program, I want to start off with a form. It says form 1. There is no form 1. But let's say I want to make another form called start form. And I want start form to inherit from this base form. Two things I want to probably do is code some stuff in the base form for a next button and a back button. All right? How would I do that? So in my base form itself, if I double click on my next button, it's going to generate this little stub. Right? I don't want to make this private. I want to make this public virtual. Right? I make this public virtual, this thing here. What it does is it allows my form itself for this method to be overwritten. Okay? I want to do the same thing with my back button. So double click on my back button and it'll do the same thing. Change this to public virtual. Virtual means it can be overwritten. All right, so those two things. Other things to do. In my base form, if I look at my properties and if I scroll down, right, the access modifier for the whole form is private. See how it says private? Unless it's public virtual, yeah, right? Yeah. If you do it the other way, unless it's the two-string method, then it can be overwritten. But if it's if you don't, the other way to do it is if you have to make it, you can make it protected virtual. But either way, it has to be something that forms that inherit. So here, the private keyword, you can use two things. You can use protected or you can use public. We're just going to make it public for now. This is for the entire form. So for the entire form itself, right? And if you look at the modifiers, right? If I go to modifier, right? So here's the form. Take a look, right? Is there an access modifier for the form? So this is accessible name and so on. We haven't made this, but we're going to talk about this in a second, right? The back button itself, both the back button and the next button, the access modifier, the modifiers for it cannot be private. This is for the control itself, not for the code, right? So there's two parts. There's the control part, the physical thing that you see in the user interface, and then there's the code behind, right? Both have to be public or protected. I'm going to make it public just to make it easy, right? So change this to public. Okay. All right. Now that I got this stuff going on, right? So I've got my this form itself. I want to use this form to create inheritance for my next form. So my next form, I want to inherit the back button and the next button, and the font, and anything else. Like for example, my form border style. Probably anything that I want to change, I should probably do here. So it's going to change my form border style to fixed single as an example, so it doesn't resize. You know, whatever else you want to change, you put in there. Okay, now that I've got that and I saved, right? I want to create my other form. Now, the only thing that I can do here temporarily in my program file, where my program.cs file, my driver program that drives my code, right? I need to use my base form as the form that's going to be driven. I have to build my project for one time at least. Why? If I don't build my project, the DLLs are not going to be created, right, on the back end, and therefore it doesn't create that relationship. So if I want to inherit from something, I'm going to need to build my project. I can't build my project this way. It'll fail because my program.cs file points to a form that doesn't exist, right? Form 1. So let's just make this point to my form, which is base form. Okay. Now let's build and run. So if I start it for the first time, it runs, right? Now, if you notice, there's like the next button's highlighted. I can change all this stuff, but it doesn't really do anything right now. Okay. Good. Now, let's make a start form. The start form is going to inherit from base form. And it's going to go to the next form, and then to the final form. So 3 more forms. And they're all going to inherit from base form. How do I do that? So let's do this first of all. Let's kind of make these forms. So I'll say add new item or new form, right? So a new item. And I'm going to call this the startform.cs, startform.cs, right? And I'll do another one. I'll add new Windows form, which will be called the next form.cs. And I'll do another one really quickly. I'll add a new Windows form, and I'll call it the final form. Final form.cs. Okay, so I got 3 forms plus the base form. Okay, start form is the one that I want to start, but I want start form to inherit from base form. How do I do that? Anyone have a clue? Yes, correct. Change the inheritance in the class is the answer. So what you do is you go to the code behind file, and where it says start form inherits from form, start form will not inherit from form anymore. Start form will inherit from base form. Okay. And I'll do the same thing without changing anything. So I've saved that. And once I do this, I want you to see something for a second, okay? I'm saving the form. It's doing its little dance. Take a look at my my start form now. Start form looks exactly like my base form. Here's the thing. Notice how this one here, in my start form, do I need a back button? No. Can I get rid of my back button? No. But I can hide it, right? So when you use visual inheritance, that's why I say you may not like visual inheritance, because there's stuff on here that's I may have to make invisible, right? Like I want to make this visibility null. I don't want to see my back button at all. How do I make a button that's on my child form, right? Yeah, I can go to visible, right? And if I go visible is equal to false, then it doesn't appear in my start form. Now, because I've built this the first time, I can go back to my program.cs file and change from my base form to my start form. And I'll go here in a second, talk about this start form. There we go. Okay, so start form. And now when I launch, because I've made my button invisible, there's no back button, just an X. Unfortunately, in the design view, so there's 2 sides. On the design side, if I go to my start form, I still see it, right? Because visually, I've inherited it. I've inherited my object, right? However, I've disabled it from being viewed when I launch my code. So I'm always going to have this situation, which can be somewhat confusing for some people, right? Can't delete this button, this back button. Notice there's no delete option because the back button itself is inherited. It's part of, because the subform or the subclass, which is my base form, right? The base class has a button. I inherit it automatically. I can't get rid of it. I can modify it. I can change it. Like for example, in my back button, I can change the back button so it doesn't say back anymore. Change something else. I can do all kinds of stuff, right? I cannot change the name. See how it's grayed out, right? That's okay, because it's a property, right? I can move the button. I can even resize the button really tiny, so you don't want to see it in your code, put it somewhere else. But by default, it's there. I can't get rid of it. So there's some stuff you can do with it to hide it and so on, but you can't. The good thing about it, though, is it's there. And you can override the code that's already there, right, in my back button. Yes, you can do all kinds of stuff. You can move it. It's totally movable. You just can't delete it. So some people may not like that because they have less control. But on the plus side, all the style, the name of the buttons, even the code, to some degree, right, can be duplicated, right, which is much easier from if I'm going to do a bunch of forms that look exactly the same, adhering to best practices or conventions for a company. They might have a certain form you have to use and inherit from it. So again, going back, just to recap, start form inherits from base form. Now, let's suppose that I want to override my button so I can go to my next. I'll do that in a second. First, let's fix the other ones. So here's my start form. And I want to fix up my, my next form. Let's just try this out here for a second. So I'm going to go to view code. My next form is also going to inherit from base form. And I'm also going to, my final form itself is also going to inherit from base form. So here's my final form, and it's going to inherit from base form. So all these ones are going to inherit from my base form, the one I created, right? Okay. Now, here's what I wanted to do. My start form, right, which is visually looks like this now. And it doesn't matter if my buttons, I'm hiding my button, so I can make it like this if I want. Doesn't matter. So I know it's not really there. My next button, I want it so that when I click my next button, it's going to hide this form and go to the next form. Remember that problem? I need to extend my form to include references to my next form. That can't change, right? Which means, let's start with my final form first. This is how I would do it, right? So in my final form, from a design perspective, I'm going to go back and look at the visual, the C# for a second, the code behind file. Remember how we did this? My previous form for my final form is the next form. That's what it's called, next form. And the way I would do that is I would do something like this. In my public properties, I'd make a new public property. Now you can make it a property if you want, right? Property. And my property would be called, it would be of type next form. And my property name would be previous form. Fine. I don't have to do it this way. I can always say the parent of or whatever, right? But I want to make it so that when I instantiate this form, right? When I instantiate my final form from my next form, it knows how to go back. Okay? That's one thing. This is my final form. And I got to do the same thing in my next form. Sorry? Prop. P-R-O-P, tab, tab. So if I go here to my partial class for my next form now, and I go P-R-O-P, tab, tab, I can create a property for my next form that points back to my start form. So I can say something like this. I can say start form, and my property name will be called previous form again, right? So the previous form is the start form, is what I'm saying. Okay. Now, when I instantiate stuff in my start form, when I click my next button, I want to instantiate my next form, right? But we have a problem. If I go to my start form design, my next button, if I double click it, right, it has this function. Now I already have click 1, and it generated another event. Why? Because it already exists. So I have to, in my start form designer, get rid of it from an event perspective, because that event, because it's inherited, already exists, right? Now, see how I can't pull it down, this click event? Because this button's already tied to it. But I can override it. Now, in order for me to override it, I need to know about it. But it's as simple as going to my code behind file and starting to type, because it detects any form that I already have. An example would be, if I start typing this is my start form, right? This dot. And I want to look at my my start form. It's actually called on, what's it called? The next form, the next button dot click, next button dot click event, right? What is it? Hold on a second here. I may have to build for a second. Just give me a second here so I can see this. Because what I've done in my base form, let's go back, my base form. Before I show you this stuff, I don't want to show you the wrong thing. If I go to my base form, notice that I have these public virtual voids, next button click, and public virtual void back button click. These two properties or methods are inherited. I already have them. So one thing I definitely want to do is override them, right? So it's going to be public override void, right? And then whatever this is called. Now, if I did this, if I kind of copy this thing, and I go back into my start form, right? And inside my class, my partial class, if I pasted it, right? I can't use virtual, but I could use override. right? Notice I can use the same event, next button click, right? Next button click is already linked to my next button because of visual inheritance. It's already there, the relationship, okay? So in here, I would say do something like this. I want a this dot hide, right? I want to hide my start form. And now I want to instantiate my next form. So I want to say something like this. Next form is equal to a new next form, just like we did before. We instantiate the new form, object, right? We've already done this many times. And then what I'm going to say is next form dot previous form, whoops, next form dot lowercase dot previous form here is equal to this. So it knows how to come back. Make sense? It's all the same stuff we've seen before. And it's a review too, because what I'm doing here is instantiating an object of type next form, which I've defined over here, right? And then I'm going to set this up to say that the previous form is this form that I'm in right now, and I'm also going to show the next form, which is what I'm missing. So I'm going to say next form dot show, and next form was lowercase n. Next form dot show. That? Let's see what happens. Oh, this previous form here? You have to make it public. So if I go to next form, hold on a second. I see. If I go to here, I have to make my previous form of type start form, and it has to be public. Otherwise, it won't show up. Remember, we did all this. We did this many times, lots of times before. When we go from one form to the next, this is the methodology, right? What was that? Okay, let's try this out and see if it works. So first of all, when I click next, it should instantiate the next form. Notice that I didn't have to create the link. There's nothing that shows up in the click event. So if I go back, or if I cancel out of this for a second, notice that when I go here in the start form, right? If I go to the start form's design side, this design, and if I click on the lightning bolt, and if I look at the click event, there's nothing there because it's now there is because I've overwritten it. But I'm using visual inheritance, right? That connection to my next button is already there. I don't have to I don't have to redo it. All I have to do is overwrite it. Okay, so that's one thing. Now, when I'm in my when I'm in my next form, let's keep doing this. Here's my next form.cs. Here's my next form. And in my next form.cs, which is the code behind file, yes. In my next form.cs, notice that it says the next form, the previous form is the start form, right? Well, I want to do the same override, right? And I've already got that because if I look at the start form, I've already got this code. Guess what I can do? I can kind of go do one of these, copy, and go into my next form, right? This one, and paste exactly the same code, right? Uh-oh. If I'm duplicating code, right, that's a call for something else, right? So here's something that's really weird, right? It's giving me this little error that says, hey, my next form doesn't understand what this reference to this is. It says cannot implicitly convert type COMP1004 next form to COMP1004 start form. Why is it giving me this error? Because next form, I'm instantiating itself. This can't be. It's going to instantiate the final form, and that's why this is not working, right? So if I go to the final form itself, remember in the final form, I also have this code, right? So the code in my next form, which is here, has to be changed. It can't be next form. It has to be final form. This has got to be final form. But I want to show you a trick after this. And this is my next form, previous form is equal to this, and so, yeah. Sorry, you want to go where? No. Well, I could. I mean, I could do I could change this to final form, lowercase. So I can rename, refactor, rename, if you really want to, and you can call this final form with the lowercase, just to be a the conventions, right? But you don't have to. Okay, now I want to get the back button working on my next form, right? My next form goes back and forth. That's the only form that is going to go back and forth. My final form only can go back, can't go next because there's nothing going on there, right? So my next form, this one, can go back and forth, which means I need a back button, right? That means my back button underscore click event, which is like this, but instead of next button click, it'll be back button click. Let me just copy this for a second and paste it and rename it. Hold on a second. I'll do this one thing. Back button click event, right? In my back button click event, I want to go to the previous form, right? So in here it would be this. It would say this dot previous form dot show, and then I would say this dot close, right? Because I don't need to see my form anymore, and it's going to be instantiated again, so this is fine. Okay. Challenge for you guys, yes?
So you can copy without actually.
No, because the double clicking's already happened. I already did that in my base form. Because I double clicked on my base form, I created that connection, it's been inherited. All the connections and everything else have been inherited from my base form to all the forms that inherit from it. Inheritance is a really weird thing. And if you don't understand inheritance, if you don't understand object-oriented programming or design, then what I'm saying to you is like, what is he talking about, right? Again, when it comes to inheritance, remember that I create a relationship, right? That you create an is-a relationship. So therefore, my start form, my next form, and my final form have an is-a relationship with my base form. That means each of those forms is a base form plus other stuff, right? Always, whenever you think about inheritance, I always want you to think, guys and girl, that whenever you inherit anything, your child class, whatever it is, derived class, all right, is always bigger than your parent class, always. And the reason for that is because the parent is going to be extended. It's going to become bigger in the child class, right? This is where people lose it. They're like, what do you mean? The child class is usually smaller, right? Because intuitively, we think child and we think small. The answer is no, actually. Child class is always bigger. It always contains more stuff. The shape of the child class includes the shape of the parent plus extra stuff. That's why we do visual inheritance in the first place, right? Or any kind of inheritance, right? Otherwise, might as well just use another copy of the parent if you're not changing anything, right? Okay, now we have a problem, and I'm going to come back to this problem, and I want you to see if you can solve it with me. All right, first of all, I'm writing it like this, long form, and then we'll go back and fix it. So here's my final form. In my final form, all I want to do is go back. I don't want to have any kind of button that goes next because there's nothing else. It's the final form, right? So let's look at the final form. Here's on my design view. I don't want to show my next button. So I'm going to go back to here, and in my next button, I'm going to make my visibility false. Just visually, so I can see that it's been disabled, I'm just going to make it really small and put it somewhere on the side, right? But I don't have a next button. I only have a back button that's visible. Right? My next button will be disabled, in effect, right? Here, I want to use the back button, and I already have the back button text already. In fact, it's inside my next form. So if I go to my back button form, because I called it previous form show, this is exactly the same. Uh-oh. I'm copying. Whenever I copy, that means there's another way to do the same thing, right? It means I can do something like this. This would work, just the way it is, copy paste, ready to go. I don't have to make any changes. Why? Because previous form for the back button is the next form. The name is the same, but the class is different, right? So I don't have to change anything there. I'm still going to close, nothing different there. So I can just copy paste. That's the beautiful thing about visual inheritance, right? However, is there a way, and this is where I have to question, right, that I can already write the code for the back button in my base form so I don't have to write this code anymore? That's the question. How can I write something in my base form where I don't have to override anything and the code already exists for me to go forward and back, right? So let's figure this out for a second. So, what was that? Yes, but the problem is I have to have some kind of form, right? I have to have some kind of form that has a shape to it, right? That is previous form. You see? So there's different techniques we can use here to fix this problem. In my base form, I could list all of its children, right, or potential children. But that means that they've never been described before. So how does the base form know about the children? Well, there's another thing that's actually called you can go into your children from the base form itself. It has that capacity in C#. Okay, it's called downcasting, right? And you can downcast like that. You can actually go into the base form, into the child form from the base form and get information, almost like the parent talking to the child. It's messaging, right? However, I don't recommend it, right? I don't recommend it because it creates a really weird relationship, right? But you can do it. Okay, so let's see if this all works. So I'm gonna run this thing for the first time, my whole thing. So next, I go to my next form. Next, I go to my final form. Back, I go to my next form. Back, I go to my start form, and I have that whole traversal thing happening. And I've only written my base form with a couple of clicks. I've got my same visual style. I'm only using my back button and my next button. But you can imagine that if I have a lot of form elements that are similar, right? Even things like menus, right? All kinds of other stuff, right? I can include them in my form. But heads up, whenever we do visual inheritance, there's stuff that cannot be overridden. Things that cannot be overridden are menus, whether they're contextual or otherwise. They cannot be overridden, okay? And there's a bunch of other stuff that I'm going to show you later on that are not overridable by visual inheritance. So why would I use visual inheritance? If I want to have the same look and feel to my entire application. That's what I would want to use it. And I might have several layout pages or layout forms that I use, just like we do in ASP.NET and other methods that I can use as templates for my applications. For example, I want a form that's some kind of login and register page. The login and register page might say login or register, but it's based off of a template, right? I might have some other kind of form that has very similar style that asks the user for information, right? I'm going to inherit from that form. I'm not going to write it again. And I want every other person who uses my application, right, in my company to inherit my forms I've already made with all the code built in and all that kind of stuff. Makes sense, right? So there's all you're doing is extending forms. You're not making new ones when you don't need to, right? It saves you a lot of time too. Okay, so this is cool, but like I said, is there a way, I'm just going to put it out there, is there a way to code everything in the base form as much as possible, right? So here's a problem I have. I know I want to go to the next, and I want my next button to go to the previous. That's what I want it to do. But I don't have a previous form. I don't know what that is, right? Is there a way of just kind of describing a property, right? I want to describe a property, but the property itself is got to be able to take the other ones. Is there a way of doing that? It's almost like, is there a property that I can create that's generic that I can use to go back to any form by passing it a reference to it? Is there a way you can think of? And the answer is yes, there should be a way, right? Because I have a relationship, right, that my base form is a form, regular form, right? Like this one. See, my base form is a form. Therefore, I should be able to create a previous form property that's passed on from my base form to my child forms that is of type form. Okay, that's the way we do it. So, some stuff to change. Let's try this out and see if we can fix it. So if I go to my start button, we have to do some prep first in order for you to make this change. One thing is my start form doesn't have anything in here. This is good, right? But we're going to change this in a second, right? So all I'm going to do for now is I'm just going to comment this out. I'm just going to create an error, but don't worry, right? I'm also going to comment the next form over here, this final form here, right? I'm going to comment this out for a second. I'm going to talk about this, and I'm going to comment this out for a second. All these things, I'm going to comment out my next form, my final form. Just so that way it doesn't cause a clash, because No, I don't want that. Okay, cool. So how do I include next form in my base form? So my base form, here's my base form. I want to create an object called next form, right? And I also want to create an object called previous form. Those two objects, next form and previous form. How do I do that? Let's make my an object that's public, right? Actually, let's make a property. Maybe we'll make it a property, prop. And we'll call it of type form. See what I'm doing? Form, because each of the forms has an is-a relationship. They're all forms, right? Regardless of what kind of form they are, they're a form, right? Therefore, I could say that the next form or the previous form, I can make it here, previous form. We don't know what it is, but it's a form, right? And every form has a show and hide method, right? Okay, that's number one. So previous form is form. Same thing with next form. Public form, then next form. Now here's something I want to tell you, right? Actually, I've typed it longhand, but it's okay. So I need to have these as variables in my base form that can be overwritten. Do I need to override these two properties? Anybody have an idea? Huh? I could, but do I need to, is my question. Do you know if I need to yet? The answer is no, you don't know. Let's figure it out. If I make them virtual, I could override them, but only if I need to, right? So let's see if I need to. So in my start form, I have something called next form, right? And I don't want to do this, right? Because I've declared an object of type next form, right? Which is equivalent to the next form, right? So remember, in my base form, just going back to base form for a second, I have this reference to my next form. It's of type form, right? I want to just instantiate it here. So in my next form, right? So in here, in my next button, click, right? If I was going to write my code, it would be something like this. I want to show my next form. That's what I want to do. In my next button, click. So I want to say something like this. And notice that it says my next form, capital M, right? It's not next form like this thing, right? The type is form, but I'm using the same name, next form. You don't have to. You can make it lowercase. But I'm going to say something like this. Next form, locally, right? I want to do next form dot show, right? Somehow. And I want to go this dot hide, right? I want to do that stuff inside my code. When I override a method, right? I overwrite it. This stuff here is gone, right? Doesn't exist. But I don't have a reference to what my next form is going to be, right? I'm going to assume that somewhere, right, I'm going to set what my next form is, and it won't be in this method. Where would you put it if you were going to put it somewhere? If you want to set the next form, it's a class. So where would you put it in? I know it's kind of weird, and this is a difficult topic. That's why I'm talking about it a lot with you guys. Where would I initialize anything inside my class? What happens when a class gets instantiated? What triggers when a class gets instantiated right away? The constructor. So that's probably where a good place to put in my form, right? So in the constructor, which is base form, in the constructor, I won't do it here, but I'll do it in all the constructors of the subclass forms, right? So I'll say my next form now is equal to whatever it's going to be, but this will never change, right? So I want to instantiate it here. I'll instantiate it in my constructor, but I'll create it here. I'll show it here. Okay. Same thing with my back button. My back button, I have my previous form. I'm just going to say, you know, previous form dot show, this dot close. Previous form, or I can say this dot hide, doesn't matter. Previous form dot show, right? And then this dot hide. Doesn't matter if I hide or show, by the way. Right? These are all on the base form. Now to connect everything to make it work, because this will fail the way I've written it. Okay, it'll fail because I don't know what my next form is, and I don't know what my previous form is. I haven't instantiated them anywhere, right? But remember, I'm never going to instantiate my class base form, never. It's always going to be the child forms that I'm going to instantiate and create. Okay, let's save this form. I'm going to go back to my start form to show you how it works. Okay, now, in my next button click, do I really need to do this? The answer is no. In my constructor, I can do something like this. I can say next form, which exists, by the way, because it's being inherited, right? This next form is equal to a new, right, form that is the next form. Next form, notice that this is a darker or a teal color, and this is black, because this is actually this dot next form, right? It refers to the next form object that belongs to the base class, right? And now this stuff here, right? I ain't gonna do any of this stuff. In fact, I can just kill it. Okay? If I'm right, I want you to see if I'm right or not. Okay? This is the next form. I don't have to create a relationship for my previous form because there is no previous form, right? Let's go back to the next form now. So that start form is done. Next form. Okay, here's my next button, right? I can get rid of all this, and I can get rid of all this, and inside my next form's constructor, I can do some of the following. I can say that next form, this dot next form, is equal to new final form, right? And this is the key. This dot previous form, right? But I made it's a form type, is equal to, right? Is of type, right? I have to cast this thing, right, to a new previous form. I have to say something about what the previous form is, don't I? Oh. We'll come back to this in a second, right? Because somehow I have to point back to my previous form, but I don't know what the previous form is. So let's do this for a second. So how do I do that? In my start form, or sorry, my base form, one thing I missed is that my next button should say whatever my next form is, right? I know that my next form is going to have these two properties, previous form and next form. So I can say that in my next form dot previous form, right? And I want to do that. Next form dot previous form. Next form is this dot next form. This dot next form. Next form dot previous form. If I can type properly, right? This is what I want to do, right? So next form dot previous form, as an example, because it's of type this, it's this thing itself, is equal to this. That's what I want to do. I want to kind of make a reference to the previous form, right? But I can't do this. This is the problem that I have, right? How do I create a reference to the previous form from this one? Make sense? Okay, so I wouldn't do it here. I would do it in my start form. So in my start form, one thing I can do is say the previous form, the next form, previous form, right? This one here. This dot next form dot previous form. If it's not available to me, see how it says it's not available? Previous form. Because my previous form, see if I typed it wrong too. Sorry, I just got to make sure that I have that. Because my base form itself, sorry guys, has this next form which is public, right? See, it's public, and it's a type form. And what I want to say is that my next form itself, the next form itself, which is public, because my base form, and I wonder if I have to build in order for me to do that, by the way, and it won't allow me to build because I got errors. How do I do that first? It's just semantics. Sorry. Moment. I have to, final form can close all this stuff too. Make sure there's no errors before I build. Because if I have an error, then I'm gonna have a problem. Okay, so let's see if I can build. Good. Now let's see if it works. So now I go to my start form. And if I say something like, I've instantiated my next form is of type new next form, then I should be able to do something like next form dot, and I bet you it's not showing up still. But I got to cast it, right? I think I may have to cast it a little differently. Sorry. So what I want to do is I want to say that this, because next form is really of type form, right? But I'm casting it as its child, even though I've defined it as the parent. I said it's the parent's parent, right? Form, right? I've defined it as a child. Now, what I could do is, I'm wondering if I could do it this way as well. I could probably do something like, instead of form being form, it'll be base form, because form itself wouldn't have it. I think I have to do this. Sorry. I'm casting it as his own self. I don't know if that makes sense to you. Just give me a second, and I'll explain this in a second. Because that's why it's not finding the property, because it doesn't exist. Sorry. And build. Good. Start form. So now, if I do this, if I say something like this dot previous form, sorry, this dot next form, form is the next form, dot previous form is equal to this. Whew, that's what I wanted. Wait, I'm not done yet, right? So my start form says that the previous form is this form, because my start form is the starting form, right? And I know that there is no previous form to this starting form because it's the start form, okay? Hold on, and I'll explain this all in a second. And if I go to the next form, I got to do something similar. I got to say that the previous form is this one. So if I say this dot next form, right? A previous form is equal to this. Now, here's something that I got to do. I got to say that the so this is the previous form, right? And I know that my previous form's already been loaded with this information when I go forward, because I've done this a couple of times. There is no next form, right? But what I gotta also point out is that the previous form, so the next form itself, which is the final form, the previous form is this one, but my next form is the final form. Whew. Make sense? No? Let's check it out and see if it works. How about that? So here's my start form. I click next. It takes me to my next form. I click next. It takes me to the final form. Click back, and we're good. So with a few little lines of code, I can move forward. Now let's review, because when you look at this code for the first time, you're like, okay, Tom, mind blown. I don't know what the hell you just do, right? What did you do? How did this all work, right? But this is the beautiful thing about visual inheritance. You might look at this and go, scratch my head. I don't know what the hell happened just now, because people don't know about this property. If you go to base form, this is the base form. This is my parent class that I'm defining, right? I'm inheriting from form, right? I'm inheriting from the form class. That's the superclass for all forms, right? That's the superclass. But then I'm creating two objects. One called previous form, which is going to hold a reference to whatever the previous form is going to be, right? And one called next form, which is going to point to the next form, which I'm going to define in the subclasses inside the constructor, okay? But they're of type base form. It's almost like I'm using a recursive definition of what this thing is. I don't even have a definition for base form yet, and yet I'm defining a property of type base form. Why? Because if I don't do that, then the child forms won't know that the next form is of type base form, which means it would have two properties, previous form and next form. Phew. And yes, it's confusing, but I'm creating a relationship back to itself. I'm pointing back to itself, and it's a recursive relationship to the properties, right? These two properties, previous form and next form, are of type base form, which has not yet been instantiated. Yes? Correct. No, because every time I instantiate, I recreate them, and I blow them away. If I have an object that's called next form and then I reinstantiate it, use the new keyword, I blow the other object away. It literally like pushes the new object into that space, right? Yes. Huh? Sure. And I'll put it up on GitHub so you can have it in a second, right? Next. Next. Back. Next. So something's wrong. So you missed something. Now, question for you, gentlemen and lady. Would you use visual inheritance? The answer is, it's complex. If you don't know what you're doing, you can mess up. However, if you know what you're doing, it can save you tons of code because I don't have to replicate the same stuff over and over again from one line to the next. Let me put this up on GitHub for you so you can see the code, right? So here I'm going to say, and changes, I've changed all this stuff. So I made 13 changes. I'm going to say, created base form, and using visual inheritance. That's what I'm doing there. Home, and then sync and push. Not a great commit message, but it means something. So if you guys go up on GitHub, if yours didn't work, please check GitHub, right? Because now you'll have everything that I have. Why am I showing you this? Well, you see it on an exam, right? Maybe. Am I going to ask you to do anything and override anything? Probably not, right? But you might see something like this because it's very efficient. Why? Because look, all my code is really in my base form. I have hardly any code in my other forms right now for these back button and next button. That means the back button and next button become trivial. We don't care about them anymore. We know they function, right? As long as we create the relationships properly in all the forms, and I would do this for you. I wouldn't make you do anything. Like I would just, we use visual inheritance then on the common items that you would use if I was to put it on an exam, right? But I wouldn't get you to do this by yourself. And even if you did, you would have access to my GitHub. So it's not like I'm not gonna like try and blindside you and stuff and say, okay, you don't have access to my GitHub and you got to do this thing and it's visual inheritance on the exam. No, because I don't have an assignment that's tagged to this. If I don't have an assignment that I've given you practice when it comes to this stuff, I'm not going to put it on the exam. There's just no way, or I wouldn't ask you to do it, because it's not fair. But you understand the concept. The concept is we can create a base class, going back to review, and then we're going to stop for a second. So we're at 6:28. In fact, I might let you guys go early today. The base class, the concept is I create a base class that I have structures that I want to reuse, like the next button and the back button. Those kind of things are very common, right? I would not want to recode my next button and back button over and over and over again. And every single assignment I've given you, assignment 1, assignment 2, assignment 3, assignment 4, it tells you back button, next button, back button, next button. You do the same thing on every button. It's duplicating code all over the place. It's inefficient, guys and girls, right? This is the better way to do it, but it presents some confusion if you're not great with object-oriented design. If you don't understand object orientation, especially inheritance, then you look at this and you'll be like, don't understand, I don't get it. I don't understand how you can define a base form when you haven't even instantiated or created a base form yet. It's almost like I'm using a blueprint inside of a blueprint, right? But the key here is I can do this. C# and advanced languages like Java will allow you to declare a type of base form even before I finish defining my class. Because I create a shape. That's all I'm doing. I'm defining, I'm reserving a shape that I'm going to later use in memory, right? And all I'm doing is making a reference. I'm not actually instantiating here in these two lines. I'm just creating a shape in memory. I'm reserving some space. And then when I use the this keyword, I make a reference to the existing form. That's all I'm doing. As a pointer. It's really what it is. I'm using it as a pointer to point to my previous form. And I'm using it as a pointer to point to my next form. That's all I'm doing. Here, there's nothing. I haven't defined anything. But the great thing is I can still use them in my code, right? If I really want to, I can override. But I don't have to even do that, right? Because even though I've put the virtual keyword in there, and you may override if you want. You don't have to override. It's not it's not a must override. Here's a question for you guys, for people who are object-oriented design and development. When must I override when it comes to object orientation? When I have an abstract class, right? Very good. When I have an abstract class, I must override. The other place I must override is interfaces, which is a whole other topic of insanity, right? Because people are very confused about what an interface is and why the hell would I use an interface. I want you always to think about telling are a contract that I make, right? So that if I implement an interface, right, then I'm telling the person down the line that they must use these abstract methods and properties. They must define them, and they must override them. And the reason for this is because, let's say, for example, I have a piece of functionality that must operate a certain way. You have to define certain things in a class. Like, for example, D&D, right? Put that example. If I said that in order for me to have a character, he must have his strength, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, constitution, and charisma defined, right? If I don't have that, then I don't have a character. And if that's not the case, I can have an interface that defines these properties as abstract properties that I must define in order for me to declare a class of character, right? It's a contract. And we do this because when we share code among us as developers, we want to create a structure for the way we do our code. And also, we can use them to declare data types, small data types that have nothing to do with a class. We can use interfaces for that, okay? And for example, the IEnumerable interface, we've seen that before. IEnumerable is equivalent to a list, right? That's what it is, a list type, right? So I can declare a type of IEnumerable instead of list. Same thing. It's just a generic. We haven't talked about generics. Next week, all right, if we have time, I'm going to talk about generics and what those things are. Generics are very challenging to understand because it's like making a generic object. And a great example of that is if I want to create a type of object that is a deck of cards, right? I'm going to give you a preview of what it is, right? I define my card class as having a face and a value, right? So example, the face would be clubs, spades, diamonds, and hearts. Face, right? That's my class I'm defining. And I might do that in an enumeration, an enum. I might even do that. I might even go so far and create an enumeration that does that, right? So it has a number, like 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it is, right? And then I want to have a value. The value is going to be 1 all the way to 13, where 1 is equal to ace and 13 is equal to king. Well, why would I do that? It's better to do an enumeration that does ace, the word 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, jack, queen, king. That's better, an enumeration. But on the back end, it has a value, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 13, right? That's why enumerations are good. So I'm going to use 2 enumerations to create a class. And the class is going to have 2 properties for my card class, face and value. Okay, cool. There's my card class. I'm going to put that aside for a second. I just want you to visualize this thing. So each card is an object, right? Now, I want to make a deck of cards. But my deck isn't going to be a list of type cards. My deck is a list of cards, which means I'm going to create a subclass of the list type. And the list is going to be a specific generic list of a type of card. And my deck is a list of type card. Whew. Right? What's the power of that? I can say something like this. Deck dot card, whatever it's going to be. I can load my deck of cards. I can have when I instantiate my deck, I can have my constructor that loads my list of type cards up. It creates my list. Like it almost like creates my deck. There's a create method that kind of fills my deck with 52 cards, right? That would be in the constructor. But then I can do something like shuffle or deal. So my deck can have different methods. So you can deal from the deck, you can shuffle from the deck, you can split the deck, you can do all kinds of stuff with the deck, right, of cards. And that would be why it's a class of type list card as opposed to of type card or of type list. Whew. Generics, and we can get there. And we can talk about the bad things about things. I have to say this. There's disadvantages before we leave off for the day. I have to say that in general, and I'm going to put it out there, inheritance is not always a good thing. because what's the danger that I have here with my form? Can you see an immediate danger that I'm in danger, right? What's the danger? Well, there's two things, right? One, if I break my base class, I break my whole application. I break my build. If I do one bad thing to my base form, it's a cascade of badness that happens through every form that inherits from it. That's bad, right? So one thing I do wrong on my base form kills my whole application, right? That's why inheritance in general, we use it sparingly, right? Because it creates a domino effect of breakages, right? We'd rather use something called composition, which is using existing objects and classes to create another class. I'll leave you with that. Okay, so we're going to end up a little early today. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week. And next week, remember that we are into week 1 of your final project, right? Which is your, you should have at least start your next week's project by next week. I know that the other one's due next week, your dollar computers, but I will check you to see how you're doing with your final project to see if you've at least started your interface, which I think is not that difficult to do, all right? I'll take questions after this, okay? I'll come back to you guys. Any questions related to what I talked about today? Visual inheritance and assignment 5. Okay, guys, thank you. See you next week.